What's up, y'all? You know what time it is? It's about to be that time.
Damn, son, where'd you find this?
Ever watch a superhero movie or read a comic and wonder why, out of all of the villains they could have chosen, the writers and producers went with the villain who has basically the same power set and abilities as the hero? Spider-Man and Venom, Wolverine and Sabretooth, Black Panther and Killmonger, Ant-Man and Yellow Jacket, Hulk and Abomination, Iron Man, Ironmonger, Doctor Strange and Mordo, Superman and Bizarro, Flash and Reverse Flash, Sonic and Shadow. Whether it is their costume, their powers, or their personality traits, there is a certain allure to seeing the protagonist basically fight a dark reflection of themselves as a metaphor for crushing their own inner demons. Often referred to as dark mirrors or evil counterparts, this trope is broad but usually asks the question, if XYZ happened to the hero, would he have turned evil as well? Harry and Voldemort, Vader and Luke can't get any more on the nose than having a dark side and a light side, but in my opinion, the juiciest villains are often designed as complete opposites to the hero. The best example of this is the Joker, probably. Often considered the greatest villain of all time in all of media. He's memorable not only for his personality, costumes, and menace, but because a maniacal clown is the perfect counterpoint to the structured, brooding vigilante that is Batman. And part of the genius of One Piece is that because of how wacky Luffy is, especially in recent years, as long as whoever he is fighting is stoic and methodical, you are getting the best parts of this trope. Oda basically made a story where the main character is a Joker type, moving through the world, taking down a series of different Batmans. Today, we're going to discuss the varied but effective ways Oda has used to incorporate this trope and these mirrors into nearly every arc, as well as tie it all into a theory for what the endgame opposites could be in terms of potential final battles. But first, the sponsor of today's video, Fabletics, also ties into the concept of mirrors. How you looking, one? Chrissy's been talking about getting into Fabletics for a while now, so when they reached out to see if we'd be interested in sampling their new collections, it was an easy yes.
It's so easy to move in these leggings. These ones are called the on-the-go high-waisted leggings, and I'm serious when I say these are the best leggings I've ever worn. None of it bunches up or rolls down. Everything from their Oasis line, the Cloud Jersey line, and Perfect Storm line is super supportive, soft, and breathable.
Honestly, when Chrissy started telling me about Fabletics, I wasn't even aware they had a men's line. But now I'm all about these pants from the Don collection. They perfectly blur the line between casual and formal, allowing these pants to work in any situation. They're comfy, stylish, and most of all, certified. I picked up the Don 5-pocket pant in black and onyx and the classic fit Don trouser in deep navy. These pants are definitely in the rotation now, along with their 24/7 tees. I needed some new basics. Fabletics delivered.
Right now, if you join Fabletics VIP program, you can get 80% off your first order. That's 80% off 5 items.
And they're even doing a deal right now where your first pair of Don pants is $19, and then you can still get 5 other items at 80% off.
Remain a VIP member and continue accessing up to 50% off sales any day, every day.
If you need to upgrade your closet, now's the chance. Go to fabletics.com/RandyTroy or follow the link in the description for more. Just about every villain Luffy goes up against can be boiled down to a single trait that they lack that Luffy has, or they're doing the extreme version of what Luffy would or wouldn't do. Luffy doesn't care how people perceive him, and his first battles are against narcissists who are obsessed with themselves, Alvida and Morgan, one being a pirate focused on their perceived beauty, and the other a marine focused on having statues erected in his own honor. Morgan and Luffy were on opposite spectrums of order and opposite spectrums of vanity. The second devil fruit we ever see is a dark mirror to Luffy's own stretching, as the lengths that Luffy can reach are also technically achievable by Buggy's splitting, but where one must remain intact to attack Luffy, the other gains value by separating Buggy. Luffy is basically immune to blunt force attacks, but it is set up early on. Aside from the sea, Luffy's main weakness is bladed attacks. For Buggy, this is the complete opposite. Blades do nothing to him, but blunt attacks go a mile. Luffy loves having a devil fruit and doesn't really care that he can't swim because he was always an anchor who couldn't. Buggy hates having a devil fruit because he was a great swimmer who now can't find undersea treasure, which was part of his childhood dream. Buggy also represents the first in a long line of if Luffy gave up on his dream and settled, he could become this guy. Buggy, when we first meet him, had no grand goals other than gaining wealth. He doesn't try to go back to the Grand Line until Luffy inadvertently inspires him. Kuro is the complete opposite of Luffy in that he wants nothing to do with adventure anymore. He wants a simple life, and he'll kill to get it. He's kind of a coward in that way, making him also a counterpart to Usopp. Krieg showed us what happens if you are unprepared for the Grand Line and only care about military might. As Zeph said, nothing will stop the spear in Luffy's heart. Luffy's will is the strongest weapon, creating a stark contrast when you look at a man only using his fists in battle against a heavily armed man focused on weaponry. Mihawk, that's Zoro's goal, but also his dark mirror, 3 swords versus 1 sword. Opposite aesthetics, but similar personalities. They're always taking naps, and with the somewhat recent reveal that Mihawk was once known as the Marine Hunter, while Zoro is known as the Pirate Hunter, connects it all together. One's a pirate aiming for the top, the other is a former pirate already at the top, moonlighting for the government, reflecting the 2 main organizations in the story. Furthering the parallels and asking the question, what do you do when you achieve your goal? Find a new goal or settle? Arlong represented settling and oppression. Luffy is the embodiment of freedom, now the warrior of liberation, and the catharsis of that fight comes from him freeing the people of Kokoyashi from real and metaphorical shackles. But you could also ask the question that if Luffy grew up as a slave like Arlong, could or would Luffy be the same way? Or is that what makes Luffy special, that he wouldn't? Would anything have changed? Luffy's goal is to become the king of the pirates, and in Drum, he's forced to go up against a terrible king who has done horrible, unspeakable things to his citizens, an individual who has also been moonlighting as a pirate. Wapol was flying his flag lightly with no conviction. Luffy's fight with Wapol is often considered underwhelming, but that's because Wapol was never a real physical threat to Luffy, but rather a diametric one in terms of ideals and values. Being a pirate isn't something you decide on a whim. It isn't a backup plan for getting kicked out of your country. Now, Alabasta is when the Dark Mirrors really hit an all-time high, as Crocodile is intentionally the Dark Timeline Luffy. Crocodile was defeated by Whitebeard in the Grand Line as a rookie, and with his tail between his legs, retreated into his status as a warlord, seemingly abandoning his dreams to be king of the pirates and trade for the more destructive goal of finding Pluton, even if he was searching on the wrong island. After Crocodile stabs Luffy, leaves him in the desert, it is conceivable that a lesser man, a lesser pirate, would have walked away from that lesson the same way Crocodile did, but instead, like all of those with the name D, Luffy continues to fight. Crocodile in their later battles questions Luffy's desire to keep fighting, as Crocodile sees all others as expendable. He can't comprehend the concept of trusting others, fighting for others, getting involved in matters that do not concern you. But Luffy does everything in that battle altruistically for someone else. Vivi, and to an extent Toto. He's ready to put his life on the line for another, something Crocodile would never do, until later on. Just like Luffy inspired Buggy to go to the Grand Line and chase after his dreams, Crocodile also inserts himself into battles that do not concern him to save Luffy at Marineford. Crocodile's stoic plans within plans methodology is in direct contrast with Luffy's impulsive, no-plan, wacky outlook, and it is precisely these clear differences in demeanor and values that make Crocodile such a loved and memorable villain. Everything we learned later about Crocodile makes a revisit of this fight appear as if Crocodile is looking at a version of himself that never gave up. All of Crocodile's taunting on a reread with the Whitebeard context feels like he's trying to justify his own actions by breaking Luffy. He's unable to do so, and in turn, he gets his groove back and terrorizes the New World in search of the One Piece. And one of the best Dark Mirrors in the series is, of course, Zoro and Mr. One. Zoro is a former bounty hunter turned pirate swordsman who can't cut steel. Mr. One is a former bounty hunter turned pirate swordsman who is steel. He is a human sword. It begs the question, if Zoro had said yes to Mr. Seven and joined Baroque Works, could he have become Mr. One? Did Das Bones have the Dice fruit prior to meeting Crocodile? We don't know. Or did he get it after joining, implying that Zoro could have been presented with the same opportunity to eat this fruit in a parallel world? Maybe. Very few fights in the series have the impact that this one has in terms of how well crafted the opponent was for Zoro, even with them being basically the same. In Jaya, we meet another one of my favorite mirrors, Bellamy. Arguably the best of both worlds of this trope. They are complete opposites, but also have very similar reaching abilities. The freedom-seeking dreamer Luffy goes up against a pseudo-nihilist who laughs at the idea of dreams. Bellamy is blind to the fantastical parts of life besides himself being a devil fruit user. And their first scene together in the bar is a direct callback to Chapter 1's conflict between Shanks and Haguma, with Luffy growing into the Shanks role and Bellamy standing in for Haguma. This idea becomes deeper in hindsight when you learn of Bellamy's connection to Doflamingo and learn more about Doflamingo. It highlights how similar these two characters are. They both idolize a famous pirate and emulate their ideals, but the difference between the idolized pirates is what makes Luffy and Bellamy great opposites. Dreams this, dreams that. Along the way, Bellamy forgot his own dreams because he idolized a man without one. Luffy becomes the one to inspire Bellamy to go after what he wants during Dressrosa. Bellamy takes Luffy's Viva card, becomes a technical Grand Fleet member, goes on to be a flag artist and dyer, what he always wanted. It's arguably the best character development in the series, and I truly don't think that we have seen the last of him. And Bellamy's introduction and view on dreams is what introduced us to Marshall D. Teach, the man who could quite possibly end up being the big bad of the series, the biggest and likely most important Dark Mirror in the entire series. But before I dive into Blackbeard, which will be basically the main point of this video and how his crew sizes up against the Straw Hats, let me chronologically speed run through some other examples and then run back. If I analyzed each of these villains with the same lens as some of the others, or every villain, this video would probably be 5 hours long. But here's a quick rundown of a few of my favorites. Skypiea, we have Enel, a lightning man who believes himself to be God, versus a rubber man who is now actually a god. Can't get more on the nose than that. Lucci was a stoic pawn for the government with no vision or goals of his own, just bloodlust, a weapon that could be pointed in any direction his superiors wished. Luffy's ambition and will have never been defeated by blind bloodlust. Moria, like Crocodile, was once like Luffy, and after Kaido crushed him and his crew, he became a sloth who gave up on his dreams and developed an expendable crew. Once again highlighting Luffy's penchant for relying and trusting others, being in direct opposition to the ideals of his opponent. Skipping way further ahead, but Katakuri was a literal mirror match, the type that early 2000s Hollywood producers would have salivated over for a live-action movie. I'll skip the nuance in that fight in favor of moving on to the meat of this video. Blackbeard, Man of Darkness versus Luffy, the embodiment of the sun. The imagery of this has already been explored with Ace's final attack, looking like a literal sun being launched at Blackbeard. No mirrors in the story have been as forced as the actual first panel of Luffy and Blackbeard. They seem similar in demeanor, but their dialogue shows that they're complete opposites, on purpose. Blackbeard likes the cherry pie, Luffy doesn't. Luffy likes the drink, Blackbeard doesn't. They're almost ready to exchange blows over simply not liking the same things, but their outlook and lofty ambitions are aligned. Blackbeard is the first person in a story that Luffy meets who is as driven to succeed as he is, but Blackbeard has a by any means necessary approach. He'll kill someone close to him to get what he wants. Not too dissimilar from Crocodile, but where Crocodile was pragmatic, Blackbeard is idealistic, imaginative, romantic, like Luffy. In recent years, we have seen, with the introduction of Gear 5, Luffy is settling into a godlike figure of joy and liberation, a reverential figure of light, goodness, and the sun. But his crew has been embracing a sordid darkness. Zoro considers himself the king of hell. Sanji has been calling forth the devil's flame and the demon Ifrit to ignite his legs. Nami has progressively become more and more of a witch as the story has progressed. Chopper, who once bemoaned the title monster, now wears it proudly and can control his monstrous rage. Brook, a literal skeleton, calls forth the chill of the underworld with his attacks, and most notably of all, Robin, who has been called Demon Child her whole life, embraced the concept, transforming into something entirely demonic, vampiric, and unrecognizable with her Demonio Floor maneuver. With the exception of Frankie and Usopp, unless you consider Usopp's lie to Arlong about being a Demon King evidence, everyone else in the crew has had clear embrace the darkness moments that I can recall. And this is in direct contrast to Blackbeard and his crew, who have always had a holy vibe to them, believing in fate, the idea that everything is preordained as if a higher power was protecting and guiding them. I wouldn't be surprised if when we start getting more and more named attacks from these individuals, they take on a light side or religious tone and vibe, like the priests of Skypiea and Enel. I believe that Oda will continue to try to paint Blackbeard and his team, despite being avatars of evil, as sanctimonious and deserving of love from the gods of the old world. This makes all the more sense when you consider that the only devil fruit name yet to be revealed on Teach's crew is Lafitte's, but we've seen it in action. It was one of the first we saw in action. At the start of Impel Down, we see that Lafitte has white wings. Angelic. White wings that allow him to fly. I'm not the first to suggest that he has some sort of angel fruit, but I might be the first to suggest that should Blackbeard get his often theorized Zoan third devil fruit, it might make thematic sense if his Zoan form turns him into something angelic, perhaps even biblically angelic, rather than any cherubic Cupid-like propaganda. Bibles, crosses, and other Christian and Catholic imagery exist in the world, so would it be so outlandish amongst the other vast mythological creatures that are represented by Zoan types? Considering that we already have mentions of seraphim in the story, something like a Hitohito no Mi model Ophanim would create interesting imagery for a final battle. With all of Blackbeard's darkness emanating from wings made entirely of eyes, versus Luffy embracing his own inner darkness with the full force of the sun behind him. And should Blackbeard's fruit have any ties to the moon, let it be a reminder that moonlight is just reflected sunlight. So Teach would always be second fiddle to Luffy. It's also possible that Imu could be an avatar of some of these ideas. And considering that Ophanim were also classified under the name Thrones, this could tie into an endgame ability in the battle for the empty throne. But whether Blackbeard gets a third fruit or not, the imagery of light versus dark will still be there, with the interesting element being that despite Luffy's light, his crew embraces the darkness, and despite Blackbeard's darkness, his crew embraces light. Reflections. Or, with all this new talk about the Mark of the Abyss, does our crew have to learn how to leave the darkness behind and embrace their inner light? It will be interesting to see which direction Oda will go with the story, but one thing is for sure, when we finally get our 1v1s against Blackbeard's team, everything will seem as written in the stars as it did back in Alabasta. Some of the matches write themselves, Zoro and Shiryu, Zoro joined the Straw Hats after Luffy saved him and basically blackmailed him into becoming a pirate. Shiryu joined the Blackbeard pirates after saving them from Magellan's poison and casually finding Teach magnanimous. Zoro is very honorable in his fights, whereas Shiryu, especially now with the clear fruit, fights dirty and wouldn't second guess attacking from behind. Usopp and Augur, the sniper fight for the ages. Sanji and Lafitte, the two sneaky guys of their respective crews with the ability to fly. Or maybe it'll be Sanji versus Burgess, the boy who wore an iron mask versus the man in an iron mask. The man scientifically engineered to have super strength versus a man with a devil fruit that gives him super strength. Frankie versus San Juan Wolf, a cyborg who builds warships versus a man who's called a walking warship. These are all fairly surface level since we still don't know enough about Blackbeard's crew, but it will be fun to come back to this concept after the story has reached that point and find the layers that Oda is hiding from us. In terms of where the story is at the time of this video, much like the Bellamy and Luffy story of idolizing the right or wrong man, Oda seems to be bringing that idea back to the forefront of the story, potentially with Loki and Zebek. So I'm expecting even more great dark reflections as Elbaf and the rest of the story continues. Not to mention we also now have Shanks and Shamrock, and of course I can't end this video without discussing Domi Reversi, which actually didn't happen until after I wrote and recorded this video, but what crazy timing as we now have Imu possessing Gunko and literally flipping people to the dark side and making it seem like everyone could achieve a Demonio Floor-like form, which ties into not only something I was speaking about earlier, but also an old video of mine where I warned everybody that was upset about Bonnie going Gear 5 that she will very likely not be the only person to do this, and I felt since that happened, what we were actually witnessing was the true power of the Hito Hito no Mi model sun god Nika. That it has the power to give people an all-white upgrade where they are completely free and able to bring whatever they could possibly dream of in this life to reality, just like the Willie Gallen quote. My hope is that Domi Reversi is the shakeup the crew needs to stop embracing the darkness and see Luffy as the beacon that will allow them all to awaken into the peak versions of themselves as we aim to eventually take down Imu and the government. Imu will flip more and more to their side, and Luffy might just be the one to flip them back and enhance them with the powers of the light, the sun, of love, and pure will.
We turn it around. We turn it around. Nice.
Even Scopper in his introductory fight commented on Luffy's all-white form, hinting that it could be the signal that the true enemy of the government has arrived. Many wonder if members of the crew will get reversied and become the demonic mirrors of themselves. When you consider Demonio Floor and some of the other aspects of the crew, we've kind of already seen this, especially with Robin. Robin already let the darkness in the same way that Bonnie let in the light. But it would be interesting to see Imu's reaction to Robin's form and perhaps give context, but should Oda feel it necessary to reverse one of our crew members, I think the most interesting situation would be for Imu to corrupt the member of the crew who, to my knowledge, has never been tempted with anything demonic in the series, Frankie. Robin fighting to save Frankie would be peak storytelling in my opinion. I also expect Ripley to get reversed or die. One of Cologne's parents might need to fall to set him on a new path, unless he's the one kid who gets to keep his parents because it's the end of the story. But the person I'd expect to get reversed the most is actually Lilith, as the lore behind her name, the primordial she-demon exiled from the Garden of Eden, is begging to get explored on the page. It's also very possible that this is what happened to Harold, and Loki killed his father to free him from Imu's grasp. The country didn't believe him and exiled him, and once his cuffs are off, he'll be there to give us all the context we need for what will likely be a solid flashback. But now that this door has been unlocked, the idea that characters can switch on a dime and become evil or potentially good via Luffy is something that will give us more and more very literal dark reflections for a long time to come.
They ain't believe in us. God did.
I hope you enjoyed this analysis and some of the presented ideas. Part of the fun of this trope is that it's a topic that lends itself to a lot of interpretation, so please put your interpretations of characters mentioned here or others that I didn't speak about in the comments below. Or if you made it to the end and don't want to post anything long-winded but would still like to support the channel, leave me an emoji or type #mirrorball in honor of the island that was home to the funkiest mirror match in the story. Thanks everybody, and like, comment, subscribe if you're feeling the vibe.
Sorry about that, Luffy. But if we're gonna make it to the final island, I've gotta turn up the heat. Yeah, I'm gonna be the king of hell! I'll tell you what. Is that okay with you, Pirate King?